In the final pages of the Christian Bible lies a book so strange, so filled with bizarre imagery and cryptic symbolism, that for 2,000 years it has captivated, confused, and sometimes terrified readers. The book of Revelation stands as the most mysterious text in all of Scripture. A swirling, apocalyptic vision of beasts, dragons, angels, trumpets, seals, and the ultimate battle between good and evil. Yet despite its prominence in the Bible and its profound influence on art, literature, and culture throughout history, Revelation remains largely misunderstood, misinterpreted, and in many ways, ignored by the very people who claim to revere it. Why has the world ignored this revelation? Perhaps because understanding it requires us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, persecution, faith, and the end of all things. Or perhaps because its imagery is so alien to our modern minds that we simply don't know what to make of it. Whatever the reason, Revelation deserves a closer look, not as a roadmap to the end times or a coded prophecy about our political moment, but as a powerful piece of ancient literature that spoke to its original audience and continues to challenge us today. A vision from exile. To understand Revelation, we must first understand its author and the circumstances under which it was written. The book begins with a simple introduction. The revelation from Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John. This John, traditionally identified as John of Patmos, wrote his vision while exiled on a small, rocky island in the Aegean Sea around 95 CE. The Roman Empire was at the height of its power, and Emperor Domitian demanded to be worshipped as a god. For early Christians who refused to participate in emperor worship, this created an impossible situation. They faced persecution, imprisonment, economic hardship, and sometimes death for their refusal to bow before Caesar's image. It was in this context of suffering and oppression that John received his vision. Exiled and isolated, he experienced what he describes as being in the Spirit on the Lord's Day, when he heard a loud voice like a trumpet commanding him to write down what he saw. What followed was a series of visions so vivid and strange that they have puzzled readers ever since. Book written in Code 1 Reason Revelation has been so misunderstood is that we often read it as if it were written directly to us, in our language for our time. But Revelation was written in a specific literary genre that would have been familiar to its original readers, apocalyptic literature. This genre, popular in Jewish and early Christian circles between roughly 200 BCE and 200 CE, used highly symbolic language, cosmic imagery, and visions of divine intervention to make sense of present suffering and to assure believers that God remained in control despite appearances to the contrary. Apocalyptic literature typically featured angels interpreting visions, numerology, symbolic animals representing kingdoms or powers, and a dualistic worldview of good versus evil. Readers in the first century would have recognized these conventions immediately, much as modern readers recognize the tropes of science fiction or detective novels. But 2,000 years later, without that cultural context, we struggle to decode the symbols. Take, for example, the famous number of the beast, 666. For centuries, people have tried to identify this number with various contemporary figures, from Napoleon to Hitler to modern politicians. But scholars generally agree that 666 is an example of gematria, a practice where letters have numerical values. In Hebrew, the name Nero Caesar adds up to 66666. For John's original audience, living under Roman persecution, this wasn't a prediction about the distant future. It was a coded reference to the Roman Empire and its emperors, particularly Nero, whose persecution of Christians remained fresh in community memory. This kind of coding wasn't just creative writing, it was survival. If Roman authorities intercepted John's letter, the symbolic language provided some protection. They might read about beasts and dragons, but they wouldn't necessarily recognize themselves in the imagery. Meanwhile, the persecuted Christian communities would understand perfectly. The beast from the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns represented Rome itself, a blasphemous power demanding worship that belonged to God alone. Visions of terror and hope. Revelation unfolds in a series of increasingly intense visions. After an opening section with messages to 7 churches in Asia Minor, John describes being transported to heaven's throne room, where he witnesses celestial worship and sees a scroll sealed with 7 seals that only the Lamb who was slain, Jesus, can open. As each seal is opened, disasters unfold on earth. Conquest, war, famine, death, persecution, and cosmic upheaval. Then 7 angels blow 7 trumpets, each bringing fresh calamities, hail and fire mixed with blood, a mountain thrown into the sea, water turned bitter, darkness, and demonic locusts that torment the unfaithful. Later, 7 bowls of God's wrath are poured out, bringing plagues reminiscent of the Exodus story. Throughout these visions, bizarre creatures appear. A woman clothed with the sun, standing on the moon with 12 stars on her head, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, 2 beasts, one from the sea and one from the earth, and 4 horsemen of the apocalypse riding out on white, red, black, and pale horses. To modern readers, this imagery can seem like the fever dream of someone who ate bad mushrooms, but each symbol carried meaning. The woman represents God's people, Israel and the church. The dragon is identified explicitly as Satan. The beasts represent earthly powers opposed to God, particularly the Roman Empire and the imperial cult that enforced emperor worship. The horsemen represent the consequences of imperial violence, conquest, bloodshed, economic exploitation, and death. The central message, who really rules? Beneath all the strange imagery, Revelation has a surprisingly simple message. Despite all appearances to the contrary, God, not Caesar, not Rome, not any earthly power, is the true ruler of the universe, and justice will ultimately prevail. For first-century Christians living under an empire that seemed invincible, this message was revolutionary and comforting. Rome had crucified Jesus, was persecuting his followers, and demanded worship. From a human perspective, Rome appeared unstoppable. But John's vision revealed a different reality. From heaven's perspective, the Roman Empire was just another beast, destined to fall like all empires before it. The Lamb who was slain was actually the conquering King of Kings and Lord of Lords. This is why Revelation's violence is so intense and disturbing. John wasn't advocating for Christians to take up arms, quite the opposite. Throughout the book, believers overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. The violence in Revelation is God's judgment on oppressive powers, not a call for believers to violence. It's divine justice against systems that crush the weak and demand allegiance that belongs only to God. Why the world has ignored the real message here is where we arrive at the great irony. Despite its popularity and influence, the true message of Revelation has often been ignored, even by those who claim to take it most seriously. Throughout history, readers have been obsessed with using Revelation as a puzzle to decode the future. Every generation has identified the beasts and dragons with their contemporary enemies. The papacy was the Antichrist for Protestant reformers. Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, and countless others have been cast as the beast. Every geopolitical crisis becomes a sign that the end is near. This obsession with prophecy and prediction completely misses what Revelation meant to its original audience. John wasn't writing about events thousands of years in the future. He explicitly says these things must soon take place. He was writing to encourage persecuted Christians in his own time, assuring them that their suffering had meaning, that God saw their struggle, and that the empire persecuting them would fall just as Babylon had fallen centuries before. More importantly, by turning Revelation into a roadmap of future events, we ignore its radical political and social message. Revelation is fundamentally a critique of empire, militarism, economic exploitation, and idolatry. The Babylon that falls in spectacular fashion in Revelation 18 is described as a merchant empire grown rich through exploitation, whose merchants were the world's important people and who led nations astray. The lament over Babylon's fall comes from the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth who grew rich from her excessive luxuries. This is uncomfortable territory for many modern readers. particularly those in wealthy, powerful nations. It's much easier to read Revelation as being about someone else, about future enemies, distant disasters, or abstract theological concepts, than to consider whether our own societies might resemble the empire John was critiquing. The vision of a new world, but Revelation doesn't end with judgment and destruction. After the fall of Babylon and the defeat of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet, John sees a new heaven and a new earth. The holy city, the New Jerusalem, comes down from heaven, beautifully adorned. And then comes one of the most beautiful passages in all of Scripture. God himself dwells with humanity. He wipes every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the old order of things has passed away. The one seated on the throne declares, "I am making everything new." This vision of restoration and renewal is the ultimate point of Revelation. After all the judgment on oppressive powers, after all the cosmic warfare, the final vision is not of destruction but of recreation, a return to the garden, a restoration of the harmony between God and humanity that was broken in Genesis. The tree of life reappears, its leaves for the healing of the nations. A river of the water of life flows from God's throne. The gates of the city are never shut, and the nations walk by its light. This is no escapist fantasy about leaving earth for heaven. The New Jerusalem comes down from heaven to earth. God makes his dwelling with humanity in a renewed creation. The vision is thoroughly material and embodied. There's no suggestion that believers escape to some disembodied spiritual realm. Instead, heaven and earth are reunited, with God dwelling among his people in a healed, restored world. What Revelation means for today. So what do we do with this strange, mysterious book? How should modern readers approach Revelation? First, we must resist the temptation to treat it as a coded prophecy about our specific historical moment. Every generation has made this mistake, and every generation has been wrong. Revelation was written for a specific audience facing specific challenges, and it spoke powerfully to them in their context. Second, we can appreciate Revelation's literary power. Whatever your religious beliefs, Revelation has had an enormous influence on Western literature and art. From Milton's Paradise Lost to modern films about the apocalypse, from Renaissance paintings to contemporary novels, Revelation's imagery has shaped how we imagine the end of the world, the nature of evil, and the hope for ultimate justice. Third, we can hear Revelation's prophetic critique of power, its denunciation of empire, its solidarity with the persecuted and marginalized, its exposure of how economic systems exploit the vulnerable, and its insistence that no earthly power deserves absolute allegiance. These messages remain relevant wherever people suffer under oppressive systems. Fourth, we can hold on to Revelation's vision of hope. In a world still marked by violence, injustice, suffering, and death, Revelation insists that this is not how things will always be. It envisions a world made new, where tears are wiped away, where death loses its power, where the nations are healed. This hope has sustained believers through centuries of persecution, oppression, and suffering. It reminds us that the present moment, no matter how dark, is not the final word. Finally, we can acknowledge the mystery. For all our attempts to decode and explain it, Revelation remains mysterious. It points toward realities beyond our full comprehension: the nature of evil, the problem of suffering, the meaning of history, the character of divine justice, and the shape of ultimate redemption. Perhaps some mystery is appropriate when dealing with such ultimate questions. The ignored revelation. The real revelation the world has ignored is not some secret code about microchips, one-world governments, or the identity of the Antichrist. The ignored revelation is that God stands in judgment of all oppressive powers, that ultimate allegiance belongs to God alone, that the suffering of the persecuted is seen and will be vindicated, and that the end of all things is not destruction but renewal, a world without tears, death, or pain. This is a challenging message for comfortable readers. It's challenging when our own societies look more like Babylon than the New Jerusalem. It's challenging when we're tempted to give ultimate allegiance to nation, party, ideology, or economic system. It's challenging when we benefit from systems that exploit others. It's challenging when we'd rather think about future predictions than present responsibility, but it's also a hopeful message. Despite all the violence and judgment in its pages, Revelation ultimately is a book about hope. Hope that justice will prevail, that suffering will end, that evil will be defeated, and that God is making all things new. In a world that often feels broken beyond repair, that hope matters. The book of Revelation remains the most mysterious book in the Bible. But perhaps its mystery is not so much about decoding symbols and predicting the future as it is about seeing the present moment through heaven's eyes, recognizing that the powers that seem invincible are temporary, that faithfulness matters more than survival, that another world is possible, and that the final word belongs not to death and destruction but to life and renewal. That revelation is one the world desperately needs to hear. If you found this exploration of Revelation meaningful, please follow our channel for more deep dives into history, literature, and ideas that matter. Like this video and share it with others who might appreciate a fresh perspective on this ancient, mysterious text. Together, we can rediscover wisdom the world